Hi, Stitchers. Welcome to Tatreez Talk, where we share conversations about Palestinian embroidery. I'm Amani, here with my co-host Lena, chatting with talented embroiderers and artists, sharing their stories, inspirations, and the cultural significance behind their work.
On today's episode, we're chatting with Danah, a Tatreez practitioner, teacher, and lifelong student. Danah is also a writer, baker, and mama of two. Welcome to Tatreez Talk, Danah. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be part of the podcast that I listen to almost daily. So this is really nice. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're so sweet. And I am very excited to get some of your baked goods when I meet you in person.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
I volunteer for all things chocolate. So, Danah, we love to start off by chatting with you a little bit about you and your family's history and connection to Palestine.
Yeah, so I am 100% Palestinian. My mom and dad are both from the city of Nablus because they're actually also related. So we're from the same family. So we
get it.
Yeah, we're from the village of Sebastia, like Qada Nablus, so outskirts of Nablus. So Sebastia Nablus. I grew up here, born and raised in North Carolina, and lived in Canada for a few years, where my family now lives. So we've always, very similar to a lot of stories that I've heard. It all always starts the same. Like you've always Tatreez has always been part of our life, right? Like we've always had Tatreez around. We've bought it. We have the pillowcases, the wall hangings, the thobes, everything. But specifically for me, I never really had anyone, or I don't really have anyone in my family who practices Tatreez. So I never really had an interest in learning. And I didn't grow up learning it or seeing anyone around me actually practice it. So that wasn't part of my upbringing to see people doing Tatreez. It was mainly just buying it, admiring it, stuff like that. So it was I was always interested in and again, I never was really interested in learning, but I've always admired it and I've always wanted to have it. So I always gravitate towards things that were embroidered or thwab or anything like that. It wasn't until actually later on in my life, more recently, after I got married. And then, so I should also mention that my husband is Egyptian. So my mother-in-law was a very talented seamstress and embroiderer, but she practiced she did cross stitch, but not necessarily Tatreez, but she knew how to stitch. So she has a bunch of different art pieces that she's cross-stitched. She used to sew. She's embroidered in different ways. She even did couching, Tahriri stitch, but the Egyptian version. Mm-hmm. So much was and macrame and all different kinds of crafts. So actually, it wasn't until her passing in 2022, she passed away, that I started, or an interest sparked in me, because I was tasked with the cleaning up her her sewing room. Mm-hmm. And it was just first of all, very overwhelming. She had a plethora of all materials. She could have opened a craft store on her own. But so I had all these materials at my fingertips, and then I started digging deeper, and I was these are all Tatreez threads, Aida cloth, waste canvas, even the plastic grids. She had even bought the kids' versions of things because her dream was to teach my daughter. So at the time, so I had my daughter, and she was around for a year and a half of my son's life. So her dream was always to teach my daughter, her granddaughter, to sew and embroider. So I was okay, it's my life mission now to I was I have to learn Tatreez for her to continue to make her wish come true and carry on that legacy. So honestly, that's how it began. Otherwise, I don't know if I would have ever stumbled upon or learned in terms of learning Tatreez itself. So it was a really big part of my healing journey to learn Tatreez because she was a big part of our life. She was very she lived in the same city that we did. She was very hands-on with my kids and with me and with my husband. My husband's also an only child. Mm-hmm. So she was a very big part of our life and a pillar in our family. So it was something that I would always I was I have to learn this in order to not only to pass it down to my daughter, but for me to heal and kind of learn how to live in this new normal of ours. And I found that once I started learning and once I started doing Tatreez, it was more meditative for me, and I would like pray for her, make dua for her. And like, it was more of just not just like doing the craft because I want to like learn it for my culture. It was more of like a healing process, a time for me to like sit and remember her and make dua for her, pray for her and all of that. So it was very like spiritual, meditative, like healing, everything combined. So with that naturally came like the learning part in terms of like going back to my roots and learning more like the actual history of it. And that's when the famous Tatreez Wafa name comes in, as like most people, that's how most people that I've like listened to from your podcast and the people I've met, like she's like the number one person that like, you know, somewhere along your journey you meet Wafa.
Yes.
Everything changes. And that's how it was for me. And I will always be like, you know, grateful to her. Like she's truly like my teacher, mentor. And like, because at the time, like this was in 2020. And I think like backtrack. So I think there was at some point, a few years before my mother-in-law had passed and everything, I came across Tatreez. I was in Jordan and I was like, hey, let me like try this. Right. And I like went to the Beled and I bought like the cheap, I didn't know anything. So I was like, I just need Tatreez materials. Like, so my aunt took me to this like, you know, hole in the wall type store and we bought some threads and fabric. And then I Googled or YouTubed a video. And I think it's like that same video that everyone talks about that they find, Roba maybe. Or,
yes.
Yeah.
So it's so crazy that everyone's story, like we've all like kind of like crossed paths without even knowing.
I love that though. I love that.
So I should say like that was my first experience, but it didn't last very long. I taught kind of myself through her videos, but then it just like with motherhood, because I had my daughter shortly after, it just kind of like fell through. And then after my mother-in-law was more of like intentional. So that's when I like was like, okay, I need like a legit teacher to teach me because nobody in my family knows. We're from Nablus and, you know, famous Nablisi women, like we don't do necessarily Tatreez. And that's why like a lot of people or like nobody in my family does it. I didn't learn from my teta. My mom didn't know how to do it. We bought it. I have like stuff to inherit or stuff like, you know, around me, but not actual practice. And it's funny because once I started learning in like true Nabilsi Teta fashion, my grandma would be like, "Fish عندك إشي أحسن من هيك تعملي?" Like, you don't have anything better to do.
She fits the stereotype. She's feeding the stereotype.
Totally.
Because she was telling me this as we were learning about Nablus in Wafat's class. So I was like, I have a story to share about this. Like real life, like it's not a stereo, like, you know, it still exists. So even though like she's like really proud of my work and she loves seeing what I do, but it's like so interesting, you know, and once you learn the history of it and like what the Nabilsi women were busy doing, you know, makes sense. But anyway, so yeah, like I came across Wafat once I was ready to like, you know, move on and like actually do something with the materials that I had at hand. Came across Wafat. And it just was like the rest is history. I took a few beginner classes with her. And then I did my first big project after I did a few like intro to Ada cloth classes. My first big project was the Tul Karim chest design. And that's the one in the photo that I had, that I sent for, you know, the Instagram. I'm so proud of that piece. I was like, I love wearing it because it was like, you know, it's like everyone can relate whenever you finish a big project. It's just like that moment of like pride because it's like blood, sweat, and tears and time and just like, you know. So that was my first big project. And then
how long did that one take you?
That one, I actually have it somewhere on my Instagram or Facebook when I shared it. It was a couple months. It was probably like 4 or 5 months of work. The nice thing about that is so my daughter had started pre-K at the time and my son was like newborn. So I would go pick up my daughter, but I would go like an hour early and it would coincide with like my son's like nap. And I would just like sit in the carpool line and just stitch. And that's how I got it done. Versus my current work in progress, which is the Village Series Thobe. I was like in cohort 5, like 2022. It's 2024, and I'm like just now finishing it. Just like there's no time, but I'm like literally like I'm like a day away from finishing this one. I'm like really like just ready for it to be done. It's gonna be bittersweet, but I'm just like we need to move on. We're done.
Yeah.
Totally understand. Danah, I'm curious, since you went down that route of like finding out more about Tatreez history, especially as it relates to your hometown in Palestine. Do you mind just sharing with our listeners who maybe don't know like what you mean with the references to Nablusi women and their like relationship with Tatreez? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So in Nablus, Nablus is really well known for our olive oil and olive trees and the products that we make out of that. So like olive oil, obviously, and then the Nablusi soap, harvesting the olives, pickling them, knafe, Nablusi cheese, different types of like pottery and other art forms. So like the women would be, busy helping the men or in the fields making these things or harvesting or helping the men out. So they didn't necessarily care for or have time to sit and stitch. They would like much rather just go to a neighboring city or village that was known for the embroidery and just purchase it. And it's even like apparent in our thobes, because if you look at like the Nablusi traditional thobe, like it's very much like textile heavy versus like, the famous like green and white and like red, like jannanar kind of like fabric versus actual heavy embroidery. Like we have very minimal light. And I think like in the books, like I've only like spotted like 2 or 3 or maybe 4 like border designs from Nablus, and that's it.
Yeah.
So that's the whole thing. And it's just like, again, that stereotype of the women that like if they catch you doing Tatreez, it's like, she doesn't have anything better to do, or it's kind of like a waste of time or something like that. But so yeah, that's the story with that. So
I'm curious, like, where the history plays into your journey too. Like, given the fact that you are also, like you said, you're from Nablus, which doesn't necessarily have like this deep history of Tatreez, but has a deep history of creating. And so, yeah, I'm just curious in general, like as you're learning and diving in to the history of Tatreez, how is that really like playing a role in your journey?
I think the part of it, of being creative, being hands-on, and being like curious is more of like what's like tapping in, I guess, from my Nablus. Like going back to Tatreez and Wafa. So after I started like the intro classes and took that Tol Karim chest design, I started attending the Thursday like stitching circles regularly, and then eventually I started co-hosting with Noor, who hosts now. Like she's been always hosting. So I co-hosted for a little bit, and then I actually started teaching at some point because I had started. So I have like many different like side projects along the way that like grew, or like that started out of this like Tatreez journey. So like back in when the whole Sheikh Jarrah events and like the aggression on Gaza was happening in 2021, I think, I did like Tatreez for charity, where I did like online classes and like we fundraised and I donated. And then after that, in 2022, I was a teaching assistant with Wafa and a few other teaching assistants through Tatreez and I did a few online classes there. So like I think learning and exploring has always been in me, and that goes back to like that Nablusi side of me that's always doing something with my hands or learning or being, what is the word? Just like discovering, or making. So I think that's really like, that's what I connect with the most.
I love it. So before we dive into kind of your teaching of Tatreez, because we do want to go into that, I'm curious also about your other family members, because our understanding is that you got started and then other members of your family also got started. Would love to learn about how your family is embracing this art form and potentially passing it down like Palestinians have been doing for generations.
Yeah, so it's funny because my story is very unconventional. It's kind of like backwards, not like the traditional like flow of like the grandma or the aunt passing it down to the grandchildren or the nieces or nephews. For me, it was like I started, and then I started teaching my mom. Actually, I started teaching my brother, and he was into it. He dropped it, but he's also a teenager, so at least he kind of like picked it up a little bit. And then I taught my sister, and then my mom. My sister stuck with it. Actually, she has her own projects of her own. She embroidered like a whole baby blanket for her baby. So it was really interesting in that way. It was really special for us as a family to like bond over, like rediscover a part of our heritage that otherwise maybe we may have not, come across or even bothered to look into. It's really interesting how things play out and like how things happen for a reason that in the moment you don't see or realize or appreciate, but then like stepping back, like big picture, you realize that, like unfortunate events may happen. That's part of life, but then there's beautiful things that can come out of that, that teach you a lot of valuable life lessons. And I think also in terms of like my family, so my mother-in-law did pass away, and then I think 2 months after that, my mom's dad, my grandpa from my mom's side, also passed away. And he was also a seamstress, and he loved Palestine, and he they lived in Jordan after they were, exiled and all of that. But like his house, like my grandparents' house, have fond memories of like, our village and the photos, and he had them all framed, and he has like all of like their like documents in Palestine and everything, So I think he's also like, his spirit is also like with me all the time in terms of like this Tatreez journey. I mean, my mother-in-law was a big part of it. And then like even after Sido, like his love for the land, his love for Palestine, his like hands in terms of like sewing, like he would always like hem my pants and stuff for me. Like he had his sewing machine like on the dinner table all the time. Like he would be the one to like hem my dresses and my pants like when we would go visit. Like he also had that like sewing, maybe not embroidery, but like that tailor in him. So that's, I have like multiple family members that have like in my like direct lineage that have kind of like brought me to this moment of like me learning and like rediscovering, digging deeper into my family history. And then my grandma from my dad's side, which I'm gonna confuse the audience and you guys for a moment. So my teta from my dad's side and my Sido from my mom's side are siblings.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So they both they passed away like within a year or two from each other. But so after my teta passed away, I had discovered that like they would always visit us like in the States growing up. So I had discovered a thobe of hers that was like that she had forgotten, and it was like those like I think 90s or 80s style like type thobes with like the patchwork and stuff with the embroidery, but I was like not a fan of the look. And naive little me ripped it all apart and preserved the Tatreez.
Okay.
Yes,
fine.
no, I was smart enough to, but I just was like, this is old school, it's boxy, it's out of fashion. I don't know, like I regret doing that. But then, so I reconstructed her, like I took the Tatreez, preserved it, and like made it my own, which is, a traditional part of our history. Like that's what we do, right? Like whether like because of either the fabric is gone, it's like what is the word I'm looking for? Worn down, yes. Like the fabric's worn down, or like it's out of fashion, or it doesn't fit, or whatever, it's passed down. So you reimagine it, right? So that was a big project that I did to kind of like honor my teta in that way. So like, and then was really special for one of my first class with Wafat for waist canvas that I taught under Tatreez and Tea was a motif from her thobe, from my tita's thobe that I reimagined. So that was like really, sweet. Really special, and really grateful for Wafat for giving me that platform to do that. Can
I ask you about, so going back to your grandmother's thobe that you took apart, which I don't think that's like a Tatreez sin. I think that's like really cool.
Look, so the funny thing is, like after I started like learning, like with Wafat and like seeing that style of like thobe and what it was, I'm like, man, I wish I had the original. I wish I
get what you're saying.
Valued it for what it was at the time. But I did it at a time before I had even embarked on this whole journey. Like it was just like, but like now it's like Wafat always tells me, like every time I like talk to her about it, I've stopped, but there was a period of time I would feel like guilt, and I would like message Wafat, and she's like, don't be so hard on yourself. Like you're literally doing what our ancestors and what our people always do. Like this is part of the thobe life cycle, right? Like to reimagine it, reconstruct it, make it your own. So you're honoring grandma still in your own way. So anyway.
I completely agree with that, because I'll be honest, like there are some traditional thobe styles that like, while I can admire their beauty, like not necessarily something I would wear. And I have bought in some thobes that are like reimagined, which I really like. But what I was going to ask about your teta's thobe that you have reimagined is, what did you create with that? What did you create with those pieces of Tatreez that you saved?
So I recreated another thobe, but it's not like a traditional thobe style. And I can send a photo if you guys want to share with
Yes,
the listener.
please.
Yeah, so I recreated. It looks more of like abaya slash not abaya. It's like a dress. It's kind of like A line, and it has velvet in it, and then it has like this fabric that's a little bit. I'm not sure what it is. It's a little bit shiny, but
Okay.
yeah. So I kind of reimagined it into like a trendy-ish thobe style
I
dress.
love that.
So I've worn it a lot. Like I've worn it to an engagement party. I've worn it to like a Sunday school dinner for Gaza that we had this past year. Like this Ramadan actually for iftar. So like yeah, no, I've made really good use out of it. I mean, I taught a whole class, revolved around it, which was amazing. So I'm really proud of that piece, given the circumstances of which it was made. But
Yeah, but I really love that word you're using, reimagined. I hadn't heard it before. I really, really like that word. I think it's, and it kind of speaks to your own journey of like the unconventional way of learning and how your family has learned. And I think that's part of the Palestinian experience that we should embrace and talk about more. I had one follow-up question to the like using Tatreez as a healing tool as well. I'm just curious, like, do you have, because you mentioned like making dua for your loved ones who have passed away, and do you have a routine that you follow? Like, let's say one of our listeners is, and we're all kind of collectively grieving Gaza, but is there a routine that you follow that really helps you kind of tune in, besides obviously the Tatreez aspect? I'm just curious if there's anything else about that routine that I think we could probably all use a little bit of during this time.
Do you mean like when I'm actually stitching and like thinking of them, or just like in general in their memory, kind of?
Both, I guess. Yeah.
I guess like when it was like closer to the time of their passing, I was more like physically, like literally while I'm stitching, I'm literally like articulating, like reciting dua. Like it was literally like very much a physical part, a very like active part of my actual stitching like time. And this is like a little pro note for if you're going to do prayers or dua or anything. Like I always like to write them down, because like sometimes like in the moment your tongue gets tied, you forget with like any type of like talking or anything like that. Sometimes you forget like points. So especially with dua, with prayers, I always like to like, especially in Ramadan, I have a little like notebook where I like write my dua down. So with this, I had specific dua that I would like write down, and I like would say it while I was stitching. More like in the weeks, months, and time like that was close to their passing. Now it's been like a couple years, so it's not necessarily as active in terms of like in that way. But anytime I do a class, for example, now I always have a slide of like, or naturally we all talk about our Tatreez journeys. So like they're all three of them, my grandparents, my tita and my sido, and then my mother-in-law, they're always a big part of my introduction to Tatreez and how. So in that way also I include them, incorporate them, because I feel like without them I don't know if I may necessarily have ended up here. I may or may not, but like they are a big part of why I started even like looking into learning Tatreez. So I pay tribute to them in that way always with my classes or introduction or anything about myself in terms of Tatreez.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
I think it's also, I just, you mentioned in the beginning how, you didn't necessarily learn Tatreez in the quote unquote traditional way. But I kind of love the way you learned it. Like, I think it's really beautiful that you kind of like, not to put words in your mouth, but it's like you started or restarted this journey to fulfill this promise that your mother-in-law made to your daughter. And you have all these other elders in your family who, while they were not necessarily Tatreezers, they all have some type of connection to textile work and fiber arts. And like, I don't know. There's something about that to me that feels really, really special and really powerful and like almost poetic, if you will, with all these people around you who are
Yeah.
like, even they're not no longer in this dunya, they're still around you and like inspiring you and pushing you. I think
Yeah.
that's really cool. And, going from there to, you talk about healing and, we just talked about how you sit and like, make dua while you stitch. But when did you go from a place where Tatreez was this center and focus of healing for you to Tatreez going beyond healing?
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, when that journey happened for you.
So I think that really hit me like after they always say like after the first year it gets not easier, like I would say easier to manage or cope with. It never gets easier, but it's
Yeah.
definitely easier to cope with. And even I would say give it more than a year. But I think after that 1 year point after my mother-in-law, and because my teta had passed away like 2 years prior, or I can't even remember, like a year prior, but my mother-in-law and my grandpa within like a month or two they had passed. So like a year after both of them had passed, I think I would say my focus, I mean, was still healing, but again, like you're saying, shifted from like actual healing to more of like active learning, diving into the history. That was a big part of or it still is a big part of why I choose to continue learning Tatreez or keep practicing Tatreez or even teaching it. Because again, like in the intro, I said like lifelong learner. I truly believe that everyone is always a lifelong learner. Like there's no end to like, learning Tatreez, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I would say like after I did like the Tul Kerim chest design and that class like introduced me to like a lot of history of the Tul Kerim area, and then I started the Village Series Thob, it like that was my push. Like I felt like after Village Series Thob, it was just like I have like over 30 pages of notes just from that class of just like the history, and I was just like in love with it because I had never like, and I think a lot of Palestinians can maybe relate to this, at least a lot of people that I know or like that I've heard through your podcast or in other platforms. Like us as Palestinians, we might not always like, tap into our history that deeply for different reasons, or like it depend, like maybe not as far back as we'd like, just for like, whether it's like trauma reasons or just like it's not fun to learn about, the killing and genocide of your own people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like the erasure of your own people. You know what I mean? So
Yep.
a lot of us don't really know or might not really know a lot of like the history of our own people. But I felt that was like a really empowering tool for me to really understand like why and appreciate the art that I'm practicing, because like without the history, it's just cross stitch for me, at least. That's how I see it. Like without understanding the background of, the motifs, the placement, the timeline, how they evolved, how things have changed, how they were taught, who wore them, who didn't wear them, like everything related to Tatreez and the different types of Tatreez. Like growing up, I didn't even know there was different types of Tatreez until like I started, taking classes with Wafa, and then it was like couching stitch and menajid and like back, all these types of other stitches that I didn't even know about. So, so I think once I started taking classes with Wafa that were very history heavy is when my focus shifted or like naturally transform, like, progressed from healing to learning, and learning not just the art form, like technique, but like very much the history. And I enjoy just like listening to like the history lectures and all of that kind of stuff. And like the books, I have a few books purchased, and like my goal is to like purchase all the Tatreez and embroidery Palestinian books out there. I might not get to all of them. I have like a bunch that I've never even opened, but at least I have them and I will get to them sometime. But like just like going through the pages and just like unlocking like the history of this art form that we have, and it's really like it's a centuries old art form that has like so much to say and so much that we can and need to learn about.
Yeah. I really like what you were saying is like without the history, it just kind of feels like cross stitch. And that's something like when I do workshops, like I only do like, Tatreez beginner, like 101, like I don't dive into as deep as Wafat does or had done in all her classes, but I always center the class around the history, both pre and post 48 and the political history
Yeah.
as well. And I think that's really important. Like I tell people all the time, like you can learn Tatreez, you can learn the technique, on your own, but really, it's so important to learn the history and what that history means, because that gives a very different context to the art.
Yeah, 100%. And I think just like as you're saying that, I was just thinking to myself, like, I know I had mentioned in the beginning, I had like briefly came across Tatreez like before my mother-in-law passed away from like a YouTube video when I bought like materials. And I'm like, I wonder if it didn't click because I didn't have context to go with it. Just like a video to just learn where to put the needle, or even the motifs. Like it was just like, oh, a pattern. Like what is, you know what I mean? Like there was context to it. So I'm like, maybe that's why it didn't click also. Like there was no sustenance to it, if you will.
You know, and this is also making me reflect because I learned cross stitch when I was much younger, when I was in my preteen, young teenage years, and like, okay, I could do it, but I wasn't obsessed with it the way I am with Tatreez. And the obsession came because I got some context as well through Wafa, and ever since then, it's like, okay, I must know more about this magical art form of my ancestors. Because that's very 100% true. Yeah. So I know that we've talked about your learning and your projects and things like that. Now let's get into your teaching. And I would like to start by just asking about the promise that you made. How's it going teaching your daughter? Have you started doing that yet?
I have. So she just turned 7 in October. So she is still young. And she's interested, but she also has a very short, attention span, as do all kids. She'll do like a few stitches. Like we have a sampler going, and we haven't even finished one motif that she chose, by the way. But it's okay. We'll work through it. But she's always like when I sit and stitch, she'll like sit down with me. She loves going through the book. She's always asking me, and I love that I've kind of like shown her the importance of the history just by like me being interested in it. So she'll like look at a certain motif or what I'm stitching, and she'll ask me like, Mama, like, where's this from? Or what does this mean? Or like, she's not just looking at it as like flowers and, whatever. Like she understands that there's meaning behind, these symbols, which I really love. So it's going like we've done like a few little projects. Sometimes I'll have her help me like take out the waste canvas after I've like loosened it up. So going back to my promise and like teaching my daughter, like, alhamdulillah, I feel like I can, say that I am, on that, journey with her. And I love that she's interested. It's going to take some time, obviously, for her to sit and maybe like actually stitch and like finish. But she's always like curious about it. And she always loves to like watch me do it. And she'll like pick up the needle. And we've experimented with different things. So like I've found that either, I can't remember, the 6 or 8 count Ada and like the very thick tapestry needles with like the floss, amazing with her. So yeah, okay. Like those like that size of materials work the best, because I've tried like 12 count Ada and like pearl cotton, and then like the yarn with the plastic needle and plastic grid. And so she's like, no, I want like something closer to the real thing, but something bigger. So I was like, okay, let me see what I can find. So if anyone has kids and wants to start some Tatreez with them, I really like the 6 or 8 count Ada cloth, and then like the really thick tapestry metal needles. You can find them all probably at your local craft store. And then like the floss, just like the regular 6-strand floss, you don't even have to take it apart with that size of Ada.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's why I love that too. Like it's super easy. So
yeah.
Good tips for for the baby Tatreez.
That's another thing. Like now, like I've tapped into like not just Tatreez for myself. Like again, and I think this goes part to like my promise, keeping my promise to teaching her embroidery, is like trying now like going down like the avenue of like teaching kids. It's very different than teaching adults or teaching myself. Like their hands are smaller, their fingers are smaller, their attention span is much shorter. So you have to be even more patient or like really like break it down for them. So yeah, it's always like, and that's what I love about it. Like, it's just like a learning process, no matter which way you take it, whether if you're learning or you're teaching somebody, and whether you're teaching somebody as a beginner or a child or whatever it is, you're always gonna like encounter something that you have to like really like, it'll always like challenge you, you know, to look into Tatreez in a different light or in a different way.
Amazing.
With your current teaching journey, now you're teaching Tatreez beyond just your daughter, right? You're teaching Tatreez to other folks. You just mentioned the difference between teaching adults and teaching children.
Mm-hmm.
What do you prefer? Like, what are the nuances? Now I'm asking. I see Lena's face. What do you prefer? Teaching adults, teaching kids. What are the different nuances that you have seen? I mean, you mentioned a little bit about the kids, but I'm just curious how they approach differently. Because I've only taught adults. I'm scared to teach kids.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So my teaching is also has had like taken its own course. So I mentioned my first ever class that I started teaching was during the summer aggression on Gaza, the 2021, with like the Sheikh Jarrah and the things that were happening. So we did that for fundraising, and that was like an online class that I did. So like I literally have photos of me with like my tripod or like my camera stand with my phone, and it was like on Zoom, like with like the phone and stuff. And that was like a call with like 40 people on there. And then I had I did a few classes like that. Online is very challenging. I don't know how Wafa managed to do it. She's like seamless. Like I learned through her online. Like it's amazing. But teaching it online is very challenging. I much rather in person for sure. And then after that, I hosted a few in-person classes. More recently, me and my two really good friends who are local to where I live have started kind of like a Tatreez group called Tatreezna. And it's basically just, we just felt like our area needed a Tatreez. It's like, again, like just like many other communities around the US and the globe, like all these Tatreez circles are popping up, especially during this time. Like, again, going back to Tatreez being healing and a source of like community for Palestinians, and just the interest of people wanting to learn. So that's where Tatreezna sparked from, like some local Tatreez group where we would teach. Again, like history is always an anchor of like our classes. So we've hosted a few, me and my two friends have hosted a few in-person classes locally, which has been really nice.
Can you just tell listeners locally for you where that is?
In North Carolina. So so I really enjoy the in-person classes because, again, through Tatreez I've built this community. Whether it was like my classes that I've done alone before I joined, me and my friends made this group, or like the classes I've taught under Tatreez and T. Like every single pathway that I've been involved in Tatreez has built a sense of like community. I've met people that I otherwise probably would have never met. I did have a public Instagram account at one point that was like a motherhood account that turned into a Tatreez account after I got into Tatreez. So through there, like I've met Lena. Unfortunately, Amani, did not know you yet, but I'm thankful that I came across you more recently. And then I had met so many other, Tatreezers through that. And then now in person, we've built this community of like allies and Palestinians who are eager to learn and just like, wanting to tap into their, Palestinian heritage the same way that we all started, or that we all did. I hope I answered your question. I'm trying to think.
I'm just trying to put you on the spot. Kids or adults, you have to pick one.
It always like everything always like the answers always go off on a tangent. So I hope
that's standard. My friends and I always joke around about like people who come in new hanging out with us. We're like, look, our conversations go all over the place. You just got to go with it.
Go flow.
Exactly.
But in terms of answering your question, in terms of who I prefer, I don't know if you actually asked that, but I definitely prefer adults over children. Speaking from just my own daughter, and if you like, even on me and my friend have our kids are on the same ages, so we've tried to teach kids, and it is a little bit challenging just because of like the patience aspect, and they're like grasping the concept and just like their tiny little fingers. But I love that they're eager and wanting to learn. Like that's a good start. I also actually taught a class at my local Sunday school to teenagers. That was interesting. I loved it. I was very proud of them. But the first few classes, I will say, were very, like, I've never dealt with, like, teenagers before. And it was kind of, like, breaking that ice of, like, you don't really get much out of teenagers.
Yeah.
And I'm not even that old. But I'm, like, looking at them. I'm like, guys, like, I know your moms. Like, we're cool. Like, this can be fun. Like, don't look at me like this older lady. But
I don't know. Does that work in your favor that you know their moms? I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't mention that part.
Well, they all know. Like, actually, it does because like we're all like such a small community. Like, I don't know. Maybe it did or didn't. But like we're all friends. Like, I see them outside of Sunday school. They see me. They know my kids. Like that kind of relationship. Like we all like mingle all the time. But the first few classes were a little bit like I was doing a lot of talking. I'm like, wow. But then like they loosened up a little bit and like most of them finished. Like I was so impressed by the way in which they grasped the concept and how eager they were to learn and like how quickly they picked it up. And like I had a couple, like it was like a 6-week like Tatreez club during Sunday school after school, and like a couple of them finished the project we did. Obviously, it was the semester, so everything with Gaza like was very much centered around Gaza and the history of Gaza and textile and all of that. So I did like the Gaza medallion, like chest design, like a smaller version of it, triangle, and like a lot of them like finished it and framed it. It was an Ada cloth class. I was so proud of them. So that was really rewarding to like. It's really rewarding in terms of teaching to like teach somebody something and then seeing them like grasp it and finish the project. Like it's a very rewarding feeling. So I enjoy that part of teaching a lot.
Danah, time is flying, but we do want to ask you one last question, which is pretty a standard question on our podcast now. Are there any major life lessons that you've learned from Tatreez?
Major life lessons. I think I kind of like talked a little bit about different life lessons that I've learned throughout my journey in terms of like learning something unexpected or like going through a loss or grieving something or someone and like not seeing the wisdom of it at the time, obviously, because you're just so drenched in your like sorrow and grief and loss and you can't see past it. But then like as time goes by and as different opportunities or things come up, for me it was Tatreez, you learn to use those opportunities to heal and then also like discover a part of yourself that you may have never knew was there or may have never discovered otherwise if it wasn't for that circumstance. Like for me, like I'm a very like introverted, anyone who knows me, especially like really well, like very quiet. I'm always the quiet one in the room. I don't really talk unless I'm spoken to. Like I'm not one to make new friends. I don't really care to have a big group of friends. Like that kind of person. Like I'm not very social maybe, unless like I'm really comfortable with you. But like discovering Tatreez, learning it, and then like teaching it has like broken me out of my shell. And now I'm like out here doing a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or like previously, like I've done like, even like on Wafats, through the Tatreez Institute, like, being a TA with her, like that was a huge deal for me, like to like put myself out there and like try something new or teach like on a platform of that size, or even just like hosting my own classes or local classes or at Sunday school, like whatever it is, just like kind of pushing myself to do something outside my comfort zone that I love and enjoy. But like, so yeah, I think it's taught me, to believe in myself and just a little bit, not scare myself, but like do something that will take me out of my comfort zone, because you never know like where that will lead you. And just like, I really truly believe that like doing things that you're not comfortable with is good for you sometimes. Like it'll shape you into, a better person. And it'll teach you different skills and different, things about yourself that you otherwise would have never discovered if it wasn't for that push of doing whatever it is that that might scare you to do.
Yeah. Wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. And before we do say goodbye, where can people find out more about your projects, your workshops, Tatreezna? Where can the people find you?
So right now, as I shared, I used to be public. I'm no longer public for various reasons. I'm truly, genuinely just over Instagram in general.
Fair.
So I don't know if I will ever start back my Tatreez account. If I do, I'll let you know. But inshallah, we're hoping that Tatreezna, between me and my two friends, will start picking up like on social media. We've picked up locally, like with the classes and stuff in our community, but we do have the handle. So followers, listeners are welcome to follow us, but it's currently empty. So hopefully we'll get that going. So anything, I'll be on there for sure on Tatreezna, and our handle is at Tatreezna, and I'll share it with you guys. But other than that, in terms of public, not much. can't really find me.
Well, for our Tatreezers or future Tatreezers in North Carolina, they will be able to find you and your workshops. We'll definitely link all of it in the show notes. And again, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story and your journey. And we really can't wait to see what you do next and who else you teach Tatreez and bring into the Tatreez family. I am so glad that we were able to have Danah on and chat with her about her journey. I really do, like, you know me, I'm a little cornball sometimes, but I do think that there is so much beauty in how she came back to Tatreez and how she's fulfilling this promise, like, from her mother-in-law to her daughter. It's really beautiful, and I'm excited to see her daughter's Tatreez journey flourish, because she's still a baby, 7 years old. She's got a long journey ahead of her, inshallah.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting because I haven't intentionally tried to teach kids, but I had this one workshop, and it was kind of like a come as you want kind of thing, like stop by whatever you want. And so there was a mother-daughter duo who came by to the Tatreez workshop, and she kind of just left her daughter there. So I was like, oh my God, what do I do? So I just kind of got started, and I like, for me, I'm so structured. I have like my whole spiel, but like we talk about like the history and everything, and I had to skip through all of that and just be like, here's an Ida fabric, here's the needle, here's the thread. You're gonna do crisscross and follow this pattern, and just let her go for it. And it's so crazy because she actually figured it out so fast, but it's so true. Her attention span is so short. Oh my goodness, but it was an experience. So definitely, I think there's a whole opportunity for Tatreez for kids that people need to tap into, because that is our future. But I'm not sure that will be me.
Yeah, same. Okay, literally yesterday, my nephew, who is 4, although he would get really mad if I told he was 4, he's 4.5. That's very important detail. But he, okay, y'all, he's so funny. He told his dad, he's like, yeah, so he calls me Chia Mimi. Chia means, basically gato in Portuguese. And he calls me Mimi because he can't say my name. And he goes, man, Baba, Chia Mimi, she be stitching, man. She be stitching. Like, he's 4.5. What are you talking about? Anyways, he's been wanting to learn to stitch. And obviously, like, I can't give this clown, like, a needle. He's crazy. So we went to the store. We went to Joann's and, like, found this, like, needle point kit. It's, like, all plastic, super easy. And funny enough, same way. He got it once I showed him. And because he also watches me stitch. And he's so funny. He's like this, like this, like this. But same as what Danah was talking about, same as what you were talking about. That little boy's attention span, he would do one line and then he'd be like, I want to do this other color. I'm like, no, you have to finish this thread. I'm going to take a break. I'm like, okay.
Oh my my goodness, that is so cute. So cute. I love it. I'm obsessed. Oh my god. Okay, future call out for all the people who've successfully taught kids. Reach out to us. We want to have you on the podcast because there are many lessons to be learned in that department. But guys, thank you again for joining us on another episode of Tatreez Talk. Like I said, we want to hear about your Tatreez journeys. So please share your stories with us at tatreeztalk@gmail.com, and we just might have you on an upcoming episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite listening platform and make sure that you leave us a 5-star review. You can follow me at Lina Stob and Amani at Minamani, and of course, make sure you follow the pod at Tatreez Talk. And until next time, keep on stitching.